Hey, Vlad here, devinsidey.com. Welcome to another video. I'll be honest with you, I never thought that the day would come on which I will record a tutorial about Git. And not only is it going to be a tutorial, but it's going to be a full in-depth practical guide. I mean, who records Git tutorials in 2021? Now, in case you're new here, you should probably know that whenever I teach programming concepts, I choose Scala. However, an ever-growing portion of the videos on my channel are related to all kinds of software development topics like this one. So stick around even if you're not an aspiring Scala dev. With that out of the way, why are we here? Well, GitHub, the most popular service to host Git repositories on the planet, recently released an official GitHub command line interface, the GitHub CLI, and I made a video about it. And while I was working on that video, it dawned on me, how can I have a GitHub CLI video without having Git videos? And so here we are. Oh, and by the way, if you're new to Git, chances are that you're also new to programming and maybe even command line interfaces. So if you didn't understand something from the last bit, don't worry about it. We're going to start from scratch. Now let's make a couple of things clear. This is not a crash course. I like making crash courses. I have a bunch of crash courses on my channel. I don't have a crash course about Git. So if you're hoping for this video to be in a crash course style, you're going to be disappointed. Seriously, feel free to stop watching right now. No hard feelings. I see you in the next one. Oh, and before you go, I'm going to leave a link down in the description to an awesome Git crash course by Traversy Media. It's just a half an hour long and probably exactly what you're looking for. You're still here. Great. Now, what are you getting yourself into? Well, this is going to be an entire mini course about Git. One video per week is all I can do for now. I'm not a full-time content creator just yet. We will start real slow from absolute zero. What's Git? What's GitHub? What are version control systems? Who is Linus Torvalds? How to install Git? What are SSH keys? How to install them? Yada, yada, yada. In case you're new here, I would like you to understand what style of videos I like to create before you commit to the whole series. After you watch any of my videos or any of my courses, mini or not, I don't want you to know just the basics. I want to immerse you into the topic, and I don't want you to feel like an imposter. Another reason I choose this particular quite lengthy style is because you're not the only person who I'm making this video for. I'm also making them for myself. I learn a lot when I make them. Now, nothing can replace actual hands-on experience, which is also why my videos are always hands-on and kind of lengthy. So A, please code along with me, and B, don't expect miracles. But still, after this series, not only are you going to be able to use Git, you will actually understand how it works, even behind the scenes. Ah, humility. What an intriguing concept. Cool, let's finally start talking about Git. Git is a source control management tool, or short SCM, which is also why Git's website is git-scm.com. Tools like Git help you keep track of your source code changes, or in fact, any file changes, which in turn helps you maintain control of your source code versioning, which is also why these systems are sometimes called version control systems, or VCS. What does it mean to have control of the versioning? Well, anytime the source code changes, it is by definition not the same as it was before. In order to quickly differentiate it from what it was before, we simply assign labels at certain points in the software development lifecycle. A VCS allows you to record historic events in your project's life. You don't want to record all the changes, just the relevant ones. You make some changes, you make some more, you make some more, and now you consider them relevant enough. And so you ask your VCS to record this historic event and thus to record a snapshot of your source code. The history can later be searched through, the events can be compared with each other or shared with other developers, etc., etc. Also, you don't have to copy-paste your entire directory if you want to try something new, so that's kind of nice. A version control system is one of the cornerstones of modern software development, and yet many developers never actually take the time to sit down and learn it properly. Here's the deal. You can watch a half-an-hour crash course, learn a couple of day-to-day commands, and get by just fine. But if you want more, stick around. Now, Git was created in 2005 by Linus Torvalds, also the creator of Linux, the kernel that is used by most, if not all, GNU operating systems. In fact, Git was created solely for the purpose of managing the source code of Linux, shortly after BitKeeper, a proprietary VCS, stopped being freely available. Git is sometimes said to be revolutionary, and we're going to talk about why in just a couple of seconds. But actually, a very similar VCS called Mercurial was created just 12 days after Git. Both tools are still alive and kicking and widely used in the industry, even though Git seems to be more popular these days. They're very, very similar. In fact, Git versus Mercurial is one of those hills many developers will gladly choose to die on. Now, we're not going to discuss Mercurial any further in this series. All you need to know is that even though there are fundamental differences in their implementation and their philosophy, from the user perspective, they're very close to being identical. And yes, tools these days have philosophies. You just have to open your mind. All right, so what's so revolutionary about Git? Well, these days, not so much. But back in the day, all the other VCSs used to be tethered to some central server. And so as a developer, you had to stay connected to it at all times. So you couldn't work on an airplane, for example. Hashtag first world problems. Another issue with them was that branching was an expensive operation. A branch in a VCS can be thought of as a different history line or an alternate reality, if you will. As a developer, you want to diverge from the other history lines, in particular from the main history line. In fact, one of the main purposes of a VCS is to help developers work independently from each other without stepping on each other's feet. And so Git solved both of these problems. It became one of the first distributed version control systems, and so no developer had to be tethered to a server. In fact, a server is entirely optional, but in practice, most teams still choose to use one. It's a different kind of server though, you don't need to be tethered to it. And branching, a very useful operation, became almost instantaneous and free. We're going to see exactly how this works behind the scenes a couple of videos from now, but for now, you just have to believe me. In a distributed VCS like Git, every developer maintains a copy of all the history lines with all the historic changes of the project. And all copies are equally powerful. There is no central authority. The changes in those copies diverge pretty quickly for obvious reasons. I mean, that's one of the goals after all. And there are mechanisms built into Git to synchronize the changes between those copies, which are called repositories, by the way. Even though Git was originally created to version software, nothing stops you from keeping track of changes in any directory you like. It could be a book, it could be your dot files, for example. I made an awesome video about this, you might want to check it out. Or it could even be the script for the very video that you're watching right now. By the way, there is also another angle that you can look at version control systems from. You can look at them as databases or even simply piles of garbage. For instance, I version my dot files, but I don't really care about searching through its history, for example, right? So every time I change something in there, I simply dump my changes in there, and I don't care about naming my historic events properly. I simply call them always housekeeping. I'm not saying you should do it, I'm just saying you could. All right, let's get busy. Now, usually when you watch a Git crash course, they're all kind of similar. You create a repository, you make some changes, you stage some changes, you commit them, you push them, yada, yada, yada. This is not what we're going to do here. This series is going to be very different. Remember, it's going to be a very practical guide. We're going to do some role playing instead. You're a developer. You just found your dream job. Congrats, by the way. Well done. Today is your first day and your company is using Git to version their software. What an intriguing twist of events. The issue is though, you don't know anything about Git. And this is where the series comes in. Before you get excited, it's not going to be easy because sometimes you're also going to play the role of the CTO of the company that you just joined. I know, life is crazy and full of opportunities. Also, don't worry about it. I got you. In fact, why don't you put on your CTO hat and decide how this distributed nature of Git is going to work out for your developers? There are several topologies available to you based on the size of your team and the size of your project, or projects, multiple. We're going to talk about it in just a couple of seconds. In the interest of time, we're only going to discuss the most popular topology, which is in addition to every developer on your team having a copy of your source code, you will also have a server which will also have a copy of your source code, and all the synchronizations are going to go through the server. Now, even though Git allows any developer to synchronize changes with any other developer, we're simply not going to do it. Not because it's technically not possible, we're doing this for simplicity and transparency reasons. All right, now don't take off your CTO hat just yet. Now that you've picked a topology, you need to decide how or where we're going to host this server. Now, there are many options out there ranging from a Raspberry Pi in your mama's basement to full-blown cloud solutions. These days, two well-known options come to mind: GitLab and GitHub. GitLab versus GitHub is another one of those developer wars. GitHub was around since 2008, and it was one of the first hosted solutions for Git. These days, it has around 40 to 50 millions of developers. GitLab, on the other hand, came a bit later and has only hundreds of thousands of developers. These days, both platforms offer a bunch of features on top of just hosting your Git repository, but we're not interested in discussing any of them. Over here, we're simply going to pick the most popular option, even though popular doesn't always mean better, and it's going to be GitHub. Now, I want to focus this video on Git instead of GitHub, but I also want to make it very practical, and so we get to play with GitHub as well. But I want to finish the GitHub part as fast as possible. Let's get our hands dirty, shall we? The first thing that you need to do is you need to go to github.com and you need to create your own account. I'm sure you can figure it out on your own. It's basically just email and password. Now, I already have an account called Agile Steel. So if you go to github.com/Agile Steel, you're going to see my account. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in a little bit. 125 should be fine. And recently, GitHub released a dark theme, which I'm going to actually turn off for this tutorial, like this. There we go. Now, GitHub also allows you to create organizations, which is a total overkill for a tutorial, but since it's free and very easy to do, we're also going to go there because remember, you're still a CTO, so we need a GitHub organization and all of the developers will be added to this organization. By the way, if you're coding along, which you should, then feel free to create an organization as well. It's super easy to do and it's also super easy to delete. All you need to do is you need to click on your face over here, go to your organizations. As you can see, I already have one called Dev Inside You, which you can check out later. So it's the same thing. Before it was github.com/Agile Steel. Now it's github.com/Dev Inside You. All right. Now we're going to go over here. We're going to say new organization and we're going to pick the free tier and we're going to call it somehow Git from 0 to Hero. At the time of recording, I'm planning to call the entire series like this. I haven't decided yet if I'm actually going to do it. But yeah, this name is available. Contact email. I'm going to pick mine. Okay, the organization belongs to my personal account. Yes, I am not a corporation just yet. All right, welcome to Git from 0 to Hero, add organization members. So this is usually as a CTO, every time somebody will join, you will just add new people. But for now, we're going to skip this step because I'm not going to create a separate account. I'm going to be, the only developer in this organization. Okay, this is just some analytics, blah, blah. We can just skip all of that and just say submit. All right, and there we go. We have our own organization. Nice. Just as a reminder, this is a total overkill. It's completely unnecessary for such a tutorial, but I really, really want to make it as close to praxis as possible. In any case, there is this one last thing that you as a CTO have to decide. And I admit it goes a little beyond a very simple tutorial, so we're not actually going to go there. But still, I'm simply going to mention it. An organization can and will have many projects, and it is up to you to decide how you map these projects to Git repositories or even GitHub repositories. The most common way, which is also the way that we're going to choose, is to simply map every project to its own repository. And if they have dependencies between each other, then it is up to you to teach your technology stack to find these projects between each other. Another option is to stick all of your projects into one gigantic repository. This approach is called a mono repo. And by the way, all approaches have their advantages and disadvantages, so do your own research and never just wing it. For instance, in Git, remember every developer has a copy of the repository, and so a mono repo would grow much faster than a regular one project repository. But there are ways to mitigate this, of course. And also, continuous integration becomes a little bit more complicated to do. I actually did this recently. It takes forever to figure out which projects inside of your gigantic monorepo actually change because you don't want to rebuild, rerun all the jobs for all of your projects. There are two more approaches which essentially mix the already mentioned ones. One is to use a monorepo, but inside of it to use a concept called Git subtrees to have each subdirectory as its own repository. Right, so before you had one big repo, inside of it many directories, each directory probably its own project. Now you have a mono repo with a bunch of directories, but each directory is also its own sub-repository. And the last approach is to use another Git concept called submodules, where every project has its own repository, but you also have one more repository which simply contains links to the others. I hope your hat is not spinning just yet. Don't worry, we're going to stick to the simplest solution. Every project is going to have its own repository, okay? And also soon you're going to be able to take off your CTO hat, but not just yet. We still need to create a repository. So you go to github.com/ and then the name of your repository, and you click over here on create a new repository. If you already have repositories, this button is going to be over here. Create a new repository. We're going to choose a name. We're going to say repo hyphen first. I believe it's sort of a convention to use hyphens. Description, all right. Optional description. Now let's say this is going to be our first repository. All right. You can make it public. Anyone on the internet can see this repository, or you can make it private. Back in the day, private repositories used to cost something. These days, even organizations can have private repositories. All right. Now, very important for this very first repository, we're not going to ask GitHub to add any files to our repository. We're simply going to click create repository like this. All right, we chose the private one because I'm simply going to delete this entire organization once I'm done recording this entire series. By the way, this plugin over here, which doesn't seem to work right now because this is a private repository, this plugin is called Octo3. If we go to, what is it, Chrome, what is it? Extension store, web store. All right, Chrome web store. And we're going to go to Octo3. It is this plugin over here. Usually it would list the directories, but there's nothing in there, so it cannot show anything. Okay, I'm actually going to click over here so that it goes away like this. Okay, if I touch it over here, it jumps out, which I actually don't really like. Okay, now over here you see a bunch of stuff and you see a bunch of commands. Now usually we would go through all of them, but we're not going to. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to go and open our organization page again. We're going to instead create another repository, and this time we're going to ask GitHub to actually add some files, and then it's going to do something completely different behind the scenes. It's going to look different, and then by the end of the next video I'm going to leave both of these tabs open. We're going to go back to this tab, and by the end of the next video you're going to understand exactly what every command over here is doing. Okay, so we're going to go over here, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to call it repo second, and what was the description? I don't remember. Okay, let's just say this is our second repository. It's optional anyway, okay? It's also going to be private, but now we're going to ask it to add a bunch of files. We're going to add a README file. All right, we're going to add a .gitignore file, and we're going to add, so we're going to choose a template. We're going to say Scala, even though we're actually not, this is not going to be a Scala repository. I'm just choosing something, you know? And we're going to choose a license. A very popular one is going to be MIT license. Okay, now it also says that it will set the main as a default branch. Now Git doesn't have a concept of default branches, but GitHub does. Okay, now this one will change the default name in Git from 0 to hero settings. Okay, now it used to be that the default branch, the branch that was created by Git, the first branch that was created. Again, Git doesn't have a concept of default branches, but you always have to have a branch. Whatever branches are, we're going to talk about branches later. Okay, so you always have to have at least one. And the first branch that Git was creating for you whenever a repository is initialized, which is what GitHub is doing for us, it would create a branch, and it used to call it master. It wasn't special in any way, but this is how it was called. And these days, the political situation, all of these things, master may or may not be associated with slavery, and so the whole world, Git and GitHub, were moving away from master to main. In fact, one of the things that are happening over here, which is git branch -m main, is going to rename the master branch into main. M stands for move. It's sort of like moving files on the Linux systems. You just move one file over from here to here, and you can use the same command to rename the files. Okay, so this is exactly what is happening here. So there are sort of like two ways to create repositories. One is you sort of like start with GitHub, and then you get a copy on your computer. And another one is when you're a single developer, you have a project locally, it's just a directory, you just have a bunch of files, and then eventually you add it here. And this is this approach that we're going to come back to in the next video. So we're pretty much done for today. I believe this is good enough for the first video. I hope it's going to be half an hour long or something after I finish editing it. I just want to show you one thing because first of all, let's actually create the repository, okay? Because now it's actually going to look very, very different. Okay, so as you can see, there's a bunch of stuff over here that we need to go through. There's commits, there's who did it. The first commit is called initial commit, and what is a commit? And there are these files that were created for us. If we go to git ignore and what is git ignore, we're going to talk about this later. By the way, this git ignore for Scala is not a good git ignore. It's like nothing. It's useless. Okay, just FYI. Okay, okay. We have the MIT license, which is kind of nice. It's written over here. And also, if you have like a popular license like this, like a common license like this, then you're also gonna have somewhere here it says MIT license. It understood that there is a file over here called license. README MD uses Markdown. In fact, it uses GitHub's flavored Markdown, so it understands a bit more things. All right, and yeah, so this is pretty much it. One sort of sidebar that I want to remind you is that we have an organization, but we have only one user. Like as already mentioned, you would usually add developers to your organization, and so you would go to probably, I'm gonna say your organizations, get from 0 to hero, and settings. Oh no, probably people. Yeah, people, and over here you can invite members. All right, let's close it for now. Cool, so in the next video, you're gonna be able to finally take off the very heavy CTO hat, and you'll be able to put on your junior developer hat, and your job is going to be to get the repository down to onto your computer. So we're gonna learn about installing Git, and we're gonna also create our first branch, our first commit. We're gonna push. We're gonna create a first pull request, and so on. Okay, for now, as always, it's been Vlad, devinside.com. Don't forget to like this video if you did, subscribe if you want to improve the developer inside you, and if you learned something today, consider supporting me on GitHub sponsors, very appropriate for this video, or Patreon, whatever you prefer, and thus watch my videos weeks and sometimes even months before everyone else. But most importantly, take care.